Thank you very much and welcome one and all in the room and also online to Chatham House's inaugural Space Security Conference, subtitled Conflict, Competition and Cooperation in Outer Space. I'm going to introduce our speaker in one moment, but I just want to give you a few housekeeping notes at the start. So this conference and the keynote, it's on the record and it's being recorded. We're very happy for you to tweet what's happening in the conference. Please use the hashtag CHSpaceSec, S-E-C. That would be great. And we're also really pleased to welcome into the room, I think, a mixture of subject matter specialists, and it can of course be very technical subjects, as well as more generalists as well in the audience. And that's really wonderful because we want, and our speaker Paul Bate would really like to get the message out to as wide and diverse an audience as possible. So I'm Samir Puri, I'm the Director of Chatham House's newly created Centre for Global Governance and Security. I'm going to introduce Dr. Paul Bate now, before he gives us 10, 12, 15 minutes or so of opening comments. Dr. Bate has been CEO of the UK Space Agency since September 2021. He leads a team of more than 300 people who provide the R&D funding to use space to increase prosperity across the world, protect the planet, and to understand the universe. Prior to space, Paul ran global sales at Babylon Health, which floated on the New York Stock Exchange in 2021 and has built a consultancy business. Paul was David Cameron's senior health advisor in Downing Street and has led on health targets and finances in Tony Blair's delivery unit. Paul very appropriately holds a PhD in particle physics. So without much further ado, Paul, the floor is yours, and please take the podium. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Samir, for the invite, for the introduction, and for letting me speak here at the historic Chatham House, home of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Now, do we have some slides? We might have some slides. We're in good shape. Okay, good. So, last week, the Prime Minister announced the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. But the Prime Minister rightly made clear that national security cannot be the responsibility of government alone. He called for a whole-of-society effort, asking British industry, British universities, and the British people to play a bigger part. That's why this conference on space security is so timely and so relevant. Because policy discussions on space too often see silos of civil and defence interests, referencing a Venn diagram of dual use rather than embedding national security by default. The interconnectedness of security, of safety and economic growth can be overlooked, as can the global and strategic nature of space technology. Protecting British national security in, from and through space needs to be the responsibility not only of government departments and specialist agencies, but of industry, academia, end users, and of course international partners, as well as civil organisations like the UK Space Agency. Space is, after all, a team sport. But why does space security matter? Well, the infrastructure of space underpins our economy and future economic growth. Everything from telecommunications to navigation and cross-border financial transactions are reliant on satellite technology. You probably used technology to get here today from space. Over 60% of the key essential climate change variables are best measured from space. Space services support £364 billion of the UK economy, of UK GDP. That's 16% of our economic output in total. But this is small scale compared to what is coming, with McKinsey forecasting the global space economy to triple by 2035, reaching 1.8 trillion per year. So we will continue to invest nationally in the UK space sector, and the wider UK economy will continue to be powered by space technology. However, our endeavours in space are not only about the pursuit of economic gain. We must keep in mind the role that science, innovation and technology play, that space plays, not only as a domain to be contested, but as a beacon of hope, even in the darkest of times. 1707 witnessed one of the worst maritime accidents when 4 Royal Navy warships hit submerged rocks off the Isle of Scilly and 2,000 sailors perished. This was the catalyst that would lead to a technological revolution, the effects of which can still be felt today. The government offered £20,000, the equivalent of almost £4 million in today's terms, to any person who could discover a way to measure longitude with strict precision to avoid a catastrophic loss of life and ships in the future. John Harrison, a clockmaker from Yorkshire, ultimately came up with a solution. Harrison's marine chronometer could, as you see there, for the first time accurately measure a ship's longitude, allowing ships to avoid maritime disasters and to navigate long distances around the globe. Now, this was a transformative technological development that saved countless lives and benefited humanity. But this wasn't the only benefit. The strategic advantage to Britain's merchants and the Royal Navy gained from this innovation cannot be underestimated. It put Britain on the path to becoming a global empire, able to trade with the far side of the world and to protect its interests overseas. Navigation at sea is still the mainstay of the UK maritime trade and naval power, but it is now satellites that provide the position, navigation and timing, P&T, needed by shipping, or the secure communications utilised by the Royal Navy. Just as technological developments in the maritime environment in the 18th and 19th centuries could impact both economic growth and security for the long term, so it will be space technology in the 21st century that does so. Threats in space can sound like a distant, almost hypothetical or sci-fi challenge, but they are very real and they have devastating impact on life on Earth when they materialise. The UK National Risk Register sets out the top risks facing the United Kingdom, as assessed by policymakers and experts in the field. The latest public register identifies 4 risks relating to space: loss of the position, navigation and timing signal, severe space weather, from the sun in particular, disruption to space services, where scenarios range from accidental instances such as collisions with space debris and system failures, and deliberate disruption, which involves malicious activities such as cyber attack, espionage, and even deployment of space weapons. Space is but one system entangled in the system of systems that facilitates our modern way of life. Just as terrestrial systems rely on space services, our space infrastructure relies on terrestrial systems, such as power and telecommunication networks, to function effectively. For example, the loss of global navigation satellite systems, particularly the position, navigation and timing service it provides, can result in disruption to shipping, which is used to transport 95% of UK imports and exports. A 7-day P&T outage costs the UK economy £7.6 billion, £1 billion a day. We're seeing hostile nations deliberately targeting systems to disrupt civilian and military functions, directed attacks to corrupt or steal intellectual property of promising technology developments, and criminal organisations opportunistically launching ransomware in the hope of financial gain. Now, the past is not always a torch that guides us. We're in a different geopolitical environment and we must adapt. Hostile actors target UK interests from the seabeds to outer space. The US is our premier ally and space partner, and I'm pleased that the Prime Minister and President Trump's meeting at the White House last week enables a deeper partnership on space. Because the US and UK have a unique opportunity to partner in space as allies, to maximise the economic potential for our citizens as space becomes even more central to daily life, and protect and defend our interests as China and others rapidly expand their capabilities. Our unique, close security relationship, shared openness to business and investment, and scientific expertise means we are ideally placed to develop space capabilities collaboratively. But we must recognise that the US's renewed focus on the Asia-Pacific region will mean that in some cases the UK will need to rely more on its own capabilities. Space is central to our way of life and that of the global economy. But increasingly, it is congested and it is contested. 30 years ago, Earth orbit was home to around 500 satellites. 70 years ago, the only satellite orbiting the Earth was the Moon. But today, there are 10,000 active satellites, as well as millions of pieces of space debris. Power in the international system is no longer in the preserve of governments alone. Civil society, global businesses, and other non-state actors are important players within this space security discussion. At the same time, the cost of accessing space has gone down, which has led to the growth of private actors and the multipolarization of the space domain. Perhaps most worryingly of all, we're seeing a breakdown in the accepted norms of responsible behaviour in space, and not everyone is playing by the rules. Space capabilities, from satellite communications to intelligence, reconnaissance and surveillance, ISR, have matured and are established and integral enablers for the global economy and military operations. We must adapt to this fast-changing world or face being left behind. The Space Agency is working across government, industry, and international partnerships to protect people and the planet by defending national interests in space. In fact, my colleague in the room, Diana Lunker, who leads our Unlocking Space for Dual Use programme, is here today and hope will be around for any questions over coffee. We work with our sponsor department, Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. We work with the MOD and others to help deliver and protect capabilities, with the Department of Business and Trades on industrial strategy, and our colleagues in FCDO to ensure our interests are represented in international fora. There are many more allegiances drawn. A vibrant commercial space ecosystem enables the UK to harness emerging technologies that will give the UK competitive advantage in the face of persistent threats from our adversaries. The UK Space Agency is building a competitive advantage for the UK by enabling the UK to work as a truly connected, cohesive and dynamic space ecosystem that spreads regional prosperity and safeguards UK-owned capabilities. The UK has the only vertical licensed launch spaceport in Western Europe, preparing to host the first vertical launches later this year. The UK's launch capabilities, once operational, will provide the UK with access to space, expertise in rocketry manufacture and launch operations, and potentially the ability to field secure and responsive launches. Securing our own capabilities isn't just an act of self-interest. It's also about being a valuable ally and a partner of choice. The UK will participate in the NATO Starlift programme, which aims to utilise existing capabilities across the alliance to create a network of launch and responsive space capabilities. These are strong foundations, but they need to be built upon. Our technology roadmaps across civil and military are shared, but not fully co-developed and not always jointly owned. Our missions are typically separate, and while we need to recognise the different military and civil requirements, there are opportunities for much more to be done jointly. That's why last year we launched the National Space Operations Centre, the NSPOC, jointly led by UK Space Command and the UK Space Agency in partnership with the Met Office. NSPOC combines and coordinates civil and military space domain awareness capabilities to enable UK space operations and protect our interests in space and on Earth from space-related threats, risks and hazards. Space domain awareness underpins all our space activities and is a critical requirement for delivering space security. Since its inception in May 2024, NSPOC has monitored 567 re-entries, 6 fragmentation events, and we have warned UK licensed satellite operators of over 22,000 potential in-orbit collision risks. This is a concrete example of civil defence cooperation to protect UK national security. Not all the threats we face have their origins on Earth, however. Planetary defence, the detection, tracking and mitigation from the threat posed by asteroids and comets is such an example. In January, the UK Space Agency joined the International Asteroid Warning Network, the IAWN, the body that brings together astronomers, space agencies and other organisations to detect and monitor near-Earth objects and potentially hazardous asteroids. Now that timing was somewhat fortuitous as the news quickly broke that an asteroid known as 2024 YR4 had been discovered on a possible collision course with our planet. It was not our doing. The probability of a direct hit at one point rose to 2.8%, that's more than a 1 in 50 chance. But following further observations from the astronomy community, that risk is now negligible. I hope this fact offers some comfort in our contested world. Space weather, however, can have disastrous impacts on infrastructure that we rely on every day, such as satellite communications and GPS systems. Understanding when these peaks of solar activity are happening and having the pools and the tools to predict them will allow us to be able to prepare and prevent potential damage. The UK plays a leading role in the development of the Next Generation Visual mission through the European Space Agency, ESA, and is contributing hardware components and instruments to the mission, as well as providing around half of the funding. There are also important roles in the mission from our US partners, with 2 of the spacecraft's instruments being developed by NASA and by NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Our colleagues in the Met Office will use the data from Vigil to offer more accurate forecasts from their Space Weather Operations Centre, which also feeds into our National Space Operations Centre. I started this speech by talking about the invention of the chronometer, how scientific endeavour and an environment of intellectual curiosity can improve lives. I'd like to finish today by drawing 3 lessons we must take, I believe, from the UK's response to the longitude problem. Firstly, we in government must be ambitious in identifying and securing the technological capabilities we need as a country to drive economic growth and to protect our national security. Secondly, the longitude problem could not have been solved without the scientific revolution, built on the safe sharing and constructive challenge of ideas and experimental evidence. We must recognise that space, that science overall, is an integral part of society and the economy. It is not aloof from it. Lastly, we must learn to once again plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. By investing today in the space infrastructure that will underpin the future global economy, we are setting the foundations for UK prosperity and influence, not just into the next decade, but into the next century. Thank you.
Paul, thank you so much. We're thrilled, by the way, that you can kick off this conference with, and as generalists, I really felt very primed to understand better the many ways in which space is actually going to really determine future competitiveness for the country, but also globally speaking as well. We're going to take Q&A. We've got about 12 minutes or so. Please, when you raise your hand, and if I select you, can you just introduce yourself very quickly? Try to keep your questions relatively succinct, and for those who are writing questions in from online, I'll be able to include some of those in the questions that we have a chance to ask you. So who would like to start? I think the gentleman at the very front here.
Hi, Thomas Harding.
Oh, there's a microphone just on its way to you.
Hi, thank you. Thomas Harding from the National Newspaper. Given geopolitical events at the moment, how well equipped is Britain and Europe in space in order to defend themselves in the current threats that we face?
Let's kick off with that one. Go for it. Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas. Nice, easy first question. So the truth of it is that other people who will speak today will be able to comment more specifically on that. The UK Space Agency is a civil agency, after all. But we have assets. Obviously, we're part of many alliances. We build the technology up, but we work very, very closely with international allies. I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you. Next question, please. Let's take the lady just there with her hand up. Thank you.
Hello. I would just like to ask what's the UK government's plan to balance national security concern in space versus collaboration in space exploration?
You forgot to introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Sonia. I'm a student at King's College London.
Okay.
Yeah. And also, with the growing private sector investment in space industry, what is the UK government's plan to regulate and integrate the commercial space activity into national security framework?
All right, so the balance sort of between how we fund exploration and...
space exploration.
Okay. So you're absolutely right to draw this distinction. We talk about space as a thing, the universe, but it's fundamentally multiple different domains. Space exploration, space science, Earth observation, PNT, telecommunications, launch, and so forth. But I think it's a mistake to see each one as a silo. So just taking the example of space exploration, we absolutely know that exploration has a firm scientific underpinning, it has an important sort of geopolitical stance, but it also has the commercial value. And that's the way we are increasingly thinking about each of these domains. We're asking ourselves, what does exploration do for national security? What does exploration do for economic growth? So rather than saying we're going to trade off so and so much money for exploration versus so and so much money for something that's more, say, immediately commercial like telecommunications, or perhaps more might be seen as having a more immediate national security interest like Earth observation or ISR. What we're really trying to do is look at where the technologies are shared, where we can invest the money that will sort of support multiple domains. Now, unfortunately, I have to wait till the spending review comes out before I can tell you exactly how much money there'll be in space for the next few years. But that's very much the way we're thinking about it.
Brilliant. We're going to come right back into the room in one moment, but I'm going to take a couple from online. Peter Dickman has asked, are we confident that this reliance on the USA as a partner will continue to be a safe assumption? And the second question, sort of related, Elizabeth Gosselin-Marlowe says, what do you make of Italy's reported aspiration to opt for SpaceX, an American program for government secure communications? Would this be detrimental to Europe?
So the US is our premier ally. We're fundamentally connected in space. That includes the space science missions we do, and it also includes a lot commercially. And we're heavily connected into the European ecosystem. We are a founding member of the European Space Agency. We're one of the 4 largest contributors as a nation to that agency. Recently, the Space Agency, the UK Space Agency, looked at that 2-3 years ago and we said, this is great, we have great relationships with the US, we have good relationships across Europe, but how do we strengthen these further? What relationships can we build through actual programs of work with our Japanese colleagues, with Australia, with folk in the Gulf? And we've carried on with all of those. We put 2, as it were, £20 million programs together, to bilateral funds to strengthen these different relationships, reflecting this sort of more multipolar world. So I'm confident that we've been building the relationships, and we know the world is changing, but I would not expect us in any way to be pulling away from any of our existing relationships. It's more a case of we strengthen those. On the specific question of Italy and Starlink, obviously that's a matter for each sovereign government. I think what is clear is that a very large number of the total satellites in space are now Starlink satellites. It is simply part of the way that that space is. But there are, again, multiple operators that we can work with. We have Eutelsat, OneWeb, with a strong UK connection. We have Inmarsat, headquartered in the UK, but with a parent body in Viasat. So we have multiple operators that are working. What's, I think, very important is that the way in which we think about things in the UK through the national security lens, but also through the lens of how do we support a range of space players to be successful in the commercial marketplace. That's the way we think about how do we catalyse investment into our sector.
Great, let's take a couple more in the room. Gentleman sitting on the edge here.
Thanks so much for this great introduction and overview. So you touched on the breakdown of the accepted norms of behavior in space. I was hoping, I want to invite you to elaborate on what we're seeing in terms of incidence of that breakdown, and also what norms we need to reinforce going forward with partners both near and far.
Yeah, of course.
That's a great question. I'm just going to take one more and then we can group them together.
Sure.
If I can just take this gentleman just over here as well.
Thank you. Micah Callahan from Airbus Defence and Space. I just wanted to delve in a bit more to the industrial strategy. And in the Prime Minister's statement, he said about increasing spending to sustain our competitive industry through investment in R&D and innovation in AI, quantum and space. And you mentioned about the need for us to rely more on our own capability. I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about how you're working with the MOD on both national and defence industrial strategies in the context of dual use. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to do that, Mike. Let me start there and work my way backwards. A bit like the question I mentioned on the spending review, ultimately we'll have to see for the industrial strategy and the defence industrial strategy. But we are working closely, and you know the well, Mike. There is, I would say, a closer relationship than I've ever seen in the way that we work, in the way in which we're sharing our plans. We're looking at what we can do. We build on the national space strategy. And for those of you who sort of follow the space documentation, that was the first time in 2021 that there was an overarching strategy for government. And then it was built on last year with the Space Industrial Plan. One of the things that did was name 5 capabilities that across government we particularly wanted to prioritise. That included space domain awareness and satellite communications, P&T, for example. We're going to keep building on that. Please expect to see that focus on the capabilities continue. But I think the real question is how do we make sure that that's not just the words on the page, but really a shared and joint effort across the defence domain as well as the civil domain. And on the question about sort of norms of behaviour, two quick thoughts. One very real deviation, to say the least, from anything that it could be considered reasonable was a destructive anti-satellite test in November, I think it was 2021, by Russia. And that's utterly unacceptable. It caused a debris field that put at risk satellites. It was in low Earth orbit. We have to remember we don't just have extremely important assets in that environment. We have human beings, US, occasionally British, European, and of course Russian cosmonauts as well. So that's an example of going so far beyond the norms of behaviour. But if I can just call out, later on in the day, Arti Honomeni from UN USA will be talking, and the work, global leadership that the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs and Arti have led is really reinforcing both the importance and the clarity of the guidelines on what our norms should be.
And we're looking forward to hearing from Arti later. And I'll just add, Oliver Mound has asked something about the Outer Space Treaty. Is it still fit for purpose? But I suspect we're going to get to some of those governance sorts of questions a little bit later in the day. I think we've got time for a couple of quick ones. So the gentleman here, just on the edge right there.
Thank you. Thorsten Kriening, Spacewatch Global. One question, Paul. We have the upcoming ESA ministerial in November with the current shift on the geopolitics that we see and the demand for more defense. ESA seems not to be the right partner to develop defense capabilities. So what is UK's position in the upcoming ministerial?
So
it's an easy one.
Thanks so much, Dawson. So first thing, the UK invested a record level at the previous ministerial. They're every 3 years, so November 2022 in Paris. So £1.8 billion. We expect to be at the centre of ESA, as we are a founding member, as I mentioned. We will announce, if you like, our full commitments after the ministerial has been completed, because it's a negotiation. But the one thing I would say, firstly, look out for the ESA 2040 strategy, which will be shortly coming, and that'll be shaping ESA's path for the future. But also, it's a little bit too easy, I think, for ESA's ministerials to be seen as being judged by the amount of money alone. We need to fund space and for space across Europe. But I think what's particularly important is we look at what is the individual and the national benefit to each of the member states and how we're greater together. So we started a whole range of really important missions. I mentioned the Visual mission as one of them. The Rosalind Franklin mission that will launch in 2028 is another. Personally, I think it's extremely important that mantra that ESA has developed. Once you've said you're going to deliver, you deliver. So let's focus on the benefits that come from the ministerial rather than insisting it's only the amount of money that's put up that actually makes us a success or not.
Brilliant. And Paul, you have ended exactly on the dot with precision, with the sort of precision that might be able to land a rocket ship exactly at 10:30, which is the end of our session. I'm so sorry if we didn't get to your questions, but there's of course the rest of the day that we'll be able to carry on these discussions. But for now, I want to say firstly, after we've thanked Paul, please stay in your seats because the next session will begin immediately afterwards. We'll just do a switch of personnel on stage. But let's just thank Paul for his wonderful comments and for joining us this morning. Thank you.